Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company. Today, I'm so excited to be talking about the fantastic series Mary and George. We are joined today by actor Tony Curran, along with creator and executive producer DC Moore, executive producer Liza Marshall, and Oliver Hermanus, who is a director and executive producer on the series, who directed episodes 1, 2, and 3. And Liza, starting with you, it sounds like the genesis of the show kind of really came from you'd studied history at university and you'd never kind of read anything that suggested anything about King James's sexuality. And so when you kind of discovered that, started digging into it a lot more, and then brought DC into the project once you started doing a lot more research and having read Benjamin Woolley's book that the series is based on. And I was interested in just those early research phases for you and kind of how your interest and intrigue in this really germinated in the idea of a limited series.
Yeah, I mean, it was, exploring the Jacobean reign and realizing that particularly their attitudes to sexuality weren't so very different to our own. And that I think we've looked at history very much through a Victorian lens. And actually, people were much more fluid and, having sex with whoever they liked, really, back then, which felt quite contemporary. And also the idea that the King James Bible, obviously the first translation, English translation of the Bible that's in all of the motels in America, was commissioned by someone whose primary loves in there were with men, and that just felt really interesting and funny, and a little bit ironic. Yeah.
I have told Liza to stop saying that so no one comes after us, but she keeps saying
it is so true though. There are motels. It's so accurate.
Yeah, and all those places that are completely homophobic. It's actually, I think the whole of James' court revolved around love and lust for men. So I think that's pretty interesting. I think that's something that people don't really know. And certainly when we were first talking about the show, nobody really wanted to make this show. And it's a deep, deep history. And this period isn't done very much, even here in the UK. And an English audience don't know much about James at all. So it felt like a really exciting period to explore.
It is, and DC, I love what you've done with the tone of the series. It's a period piece, but it kind of is very specific and true to its time, but also feels like it has a modern lens in how we're watching and interpreting it at the same time. And I think that's such a delicate balance to try and craft and create. So how did you set about doing that?
Well, in my first email to Liza, I was like, I referenced Deadwood and I Claudius, because I think they're two shows that I love. And Deadwood which Tony is in. So we sort of combine those worlds. But what Deadwood is doing is it's saying, well, what is the best way of diving into the culture and feeling of a period and bringing it to life? So, the real Catholic swore by saying damn or Jesus. But he was like, no, we need it to be rougher already. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And then Claudius, I think, is a show that was, it's not in Latin. It was on for a British audience, and it was trying to be a sort of late night show with middle class English people in it. So you're always, with a period drama, going to be existing somewhere between then and now, and it's just finding the right balance. And so I just wanted it to have, one of the key things I did was in the first document about this, to try and get people to pay me to write an episode, is I included swearing, and that might sound cheap, but it meant everyone knew from the beginning, this is what we want to do. This was a filthy, dirty era, and we want to echo it and mirror it.
And Tony, for you in playing King James, I know that you did such extensive research. You had the chance to talk to Benjamin about his book. But I was interested in how much his childhood played into the way that you interpreted him and inhabited him, because, he lost both of his parents quite horrifically at a young age. And it kind of feels like he was surrounded by violence, and that kind of creates this seed of him really wanting to disassociate and kind of stay away from that, even as leader of a country at a time where that was quite rampant in society. And so how much did his childhood kind of play into the way that you perceived him?
Yeah, well, I think it was a huge part of the way me and Ollie and the other directors and Liza and David, I've talked about that, and also with Benjamin as well. I think anything, your sort of more informative years of what they say is from your when you're born to you're 7 or 8 years old. So I think James's experience with tragedy in his life was obviously Lord Darnley was blown up and his mother was executed by Queen Elizabeth. I think those elements played a huge part in his sort of his psyche, in his sort of and maybe that had a lot to do with the idea that he called himself Rex Pacificus, because he was the so-called Great King of Peace, and he didn't want anything to do with sort of warring with France or Spain. He had these regents, Buchanan and so on, sort of teaching him the ways of the world. So, and I mentioned that, I've said it before, like he didn't have a patriarch. He didn't have a matriarch. He never had a mother. So he was brought up by all these men who were sort of, I'm sure they were all sort of pulling at him for their own ends in many ways. So I think, no wonder he thought, fuck it, let's go riding and let's go hunting and and let's, have a more of a sort of a hedonistic lifestyle, as it were, close Parliament for 6 years. But no, that's, I guess that was a lot to do with how he sort of how he became who he became, I guess.
It's great. And Oliver, in terms of directing on the show, I love the visual language that you set right from the very beginning. We know the world that we're in from the choices that you've made creatively, but there's also the element of not just setting it up for yourself, but kind of creating a foundation for other directors to come in later in the series and to kind of bring their own interpretation, but to use everything that you've built as the foundation. And so how did that shape a lot of the pre-production and kind of directive for you?
Oh yeah, that's so weird. It was so weird. It was weird. The main reason why it was weird was because I would cast the actors and meet the actors and work with the actors, and then I didn't get to shoot the end of their story. It just felt strange to that was the part for me as a director. I was like, I'm like setting up the arc of the character. But you don't have the sort of payoff of actually completing that with the actor, which I've never had before, because in a movie that's just not how it works. So that was the unexpected strange feeling of letting something go, because you're sort of handing the actors over to other directors, and you just know that that they're gonna particularly with Tony, because Tony actually, King James, you really get the meat of James's narrative after me. So that he really becomes these dimensions kind of expand episodes 4 and 5 particularly. So there was a lot of jealousy involved in the actors being handed over to other directors. But
it was, yeah. Well, it was like letting go of the apron strings, because I mean, very much like Alex, and we like Florian, but when we all left Ollie, we were like, oh no, what's gonna happen? Daddy.
It is a weird thing, because we had shot the 3 episodes quite contained. We really started as what felt like a movie. We were same team, same actors for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then it sort of came to the point where the other 2 directors were going to start shooting, and we were kind of actually going to end up shooting the 3 of us together. That was a strange kind of ecosystem. But in terms of setting it up, I think that, I mean, for me, it's kind of I'm very fortunate that I got to set it up in that sense, where I think in some ways perhaps it might be harder to inherit the sort of feeling and look and style and photography and lensing of a show. I feel like that is a challenge. So I'm very grateful that I got to go first.
Yeah.
It's so funny too, because when Tony, you were like, oh, it's like separating from the apron strings, it started making me think about that opening scene in the series where Mary doesn't want to cut the umbilical cord and is literally wanting to stay tethered to her child, and it kind of really feels like it's almost a thesis for the entire series. And DC, Liza, and Oliver, I wanted to just ask you about kind of that moment and how that really sets the audience up for exactly what this show is going to be, especially because it sounds like that was in the scripts from a very early stage as that starting point.
Yeah, I mean, that scene was untouched. It was in Dave's very first draft, and it remained the same through all of the redrafts, didn't it, Dave? It's the same scene. It really set out the soul of the show.
Yeah, to be honest, 1 and 2 basically what I wrote. It was one of the weirdest processes. I've worked on lots of scripts, and usually you get fucked around with, you get made to rewrite stuff, and they can become quite joyless. And I do feel like 1 and 2 are raw and they're rough and ready, and that opening is really part of it. Just so this is not a normal mother, not a normal son, not a normal story. Catch up.
Yeah, I definitely I have my when I read it the first time, there was the very strong visual that I had of seeing the baby hit the camera. I just thought that would be funny if the baby actually hit the lens, because it just the sort of nature of that being the very first image of a story was kind of just so jarring and interesting, that we spent this strange amount of time trying to get that right, of building a perspex box and drop a baby on, and not a real baby, but a fake baby.
But yeah, we killed a lot of babies making the show.
Just like it became like that became a big thing for me, like dropping things onto the lens, because it was kind of inspired by that opening line, which I think really does kind of in a second tell you what kind of show you're going to be watching.
It does. And Tony, with your character as well, there's something that I kind of feel like you always come back to with King James, which I love, which is the idea that most characters want meaning or distraction, but that he's actually a character that wants both. He wants the meaning, but he's also kind of running away from himself. And so there's this real internal push and pull in him. And I was interested in how that created a lot of framework for him.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of the characters in this show that sort of have that, they're trying to find themselves, but they're trying to lose themselves as well. I think George is, we've talked about that before. George's journey is the most sort of, maybe the most compelling or the most fleshed out. He's definitely the most sort of journey. But no, I think we do that in humanity, don't we? We do that all the time. We sort of lose ourselves in, extracurricular activity. And I think James certainly. He wanted to express his individuality through the, sensual pleasures, hunting, and the arts. He spoke Latin, French. He spoke a bunch of different languages. He was he was called the wisest fool in Christendom. That was another title that he was given, I'm sure. So no, I just thought it was a really an interesting sort of dive into sort of human experience and how so much pressure of being a monarch like that, and trying to run away from it, especially from where he came from in his past, and not having a matriarchal figure in your life, I think is a huge can have a huge impact on the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And, I mean, for all of you as well, the show is so much an exploration of transactions of power. And it feels like every single scene has such intent in terms of who holds the power, who wants the power. Does it start with one character at the beginning of a scene and then leave with another character having the balance thrown in their direction? And I was just interested in how you went into a show like this scene by scene, and just really looking at what is that balance of power between all of the characters at any point, because it's so wonderful the way it's constantly at play.
Yeah, no, it's constantly evolving, isn't it? There's times where James wants rid of the power, and if you ask Oliver, in later episodes, he doesn't want the power anymore. He entrusts George to go to Spain and with Charles, and make some good deals, but obviously that goes a bit pear-shaped. But I think, I think as you mentioned, it's very true, the balance of power with all these characters, like from Sandy and Mary, George and Francis Bacon, the Overburys and all these characters is constantly sort of evolving and changing. And, as the old adage, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And certainly for George's, hubris, if you will, has sort of, it could have went a lot better for Georgie boy, but sadly it went, there's that amazing moment at the end where it sort of pans in on Mary, and, the king is gone, and so is her son, sadly,
Yeah. I did see a pattern. I worked this out from the writing when I was preparing the episodes, was that often when Dave has this talent where everyone just leaves the room. Somebody leaves the room if they've said what they wanted to say. But then you always know that person, obviously in Dave's mind, that person is having the last word, and then they're going to walk out. And so we have a series of scenes where there'll be like 8 characters at the start of the scene, and by the end of it, there'll be one person left standing in the room, and you always go, okay, that's the weakest person, or that person has the least amount of agency in this moment. There's a lot of exits.
Yeah, I've said my piece. See ya.
Yeah, exactly. Mic dropping.
Yeah,
we had really good reviews. I'm saying this so I can say we had one really bad review, and it said this is just the story of a pimp and a prostitute. And I was like, I would maybe put that on the poster, like,
wow.
because I feel like there is it was, to be honest, most of the review I would include on a poster, but I think there is a thing of seeing when sort of poor people with nothing sell their bodies or trade themselves. It's talked about in a certain way, but if you look at how the ruling classes in this country have used beauty, bodies to secure their finances, to secure their legacy, even into the last century, even in this century, that is the game. That is how you do it. That's how you advance. That's how you keep power, bodies. And so I for me, I wanted that to permeate everything. Everyone is in some way involved in these transactional relationships. It permeates through everything. And it means everyone is having to play these power games all the times. And if you are beautiful, that is the game you play. If you're like Mary, you're smart and you know how to move the pawn pieces around, that's the game you play. And someone like James, I think I respect, because on some level he hates the game. He doesn't like it, but he's it's a bit the Al Pacino, they draw me back in. Like, he's constantly fighting that. Like, he wants away from it, and then he gets seduced and lured back into it because he loves beauty. Like, yeah.
No, it's true. It's very Al Pacino. But, yeah.
Were you weighing up doing your Al Pacino impression there, Tony? I could see you.
No, I was good. I think Nick does a great. Maybe Nick can do it one day.
We'll get him on for that.
Or maybe Liza can do it. I don't know.
I don't think. I'm not going to bring it out. It's too good to bring out.
She's going to show up the actors and the director. Hoo-ha. I'm sorry. Excuse me for dropping the F-bomb earlier, but I know this. David's wonderful scripts are very fruity and have that vernacular, but in many ways, you think, oh, he's a bit common, or he's got a dirty tongue, but in my opinion, I think it's an expressionism of passion in the show, of a cutting edge, sort of a wisdom or a wit, or and in life it can be like that as well. Obviously, you don't use a fruity vernacular all the time, but I think in this show it's the way it's written, it doesn't. For me, I don't think it doesn't come over as being crass. It comes over as being witty and funny and sharp and gritty and edgy, which I think is really a great part of David's writing.
Definitely.
David Milton wrote Deadwood.
I fucking love it.
Liza and DC, I also wanted to ask you both about kind of creating that dynamic between Mary and George's characters, played so wonderfully by Nicholas and Julianne, because when we first meet George, he's quite young and quite innocent and very easily molded by his mother. And we kind of see him growing to a space of rebellion and wanting to break free and, be in these power making moments without her input, and to have that autonomy. But at the end of the day, he's still so shaped by the way that she pursues ambition, even down to seeing how it starts to corrupt him just as much as it has her. And I was just interested in how the two of you said about, okay, if we're telling the whole story over this many episodes, how do we want to kind of gradually build that arc into the point where he's just so corrupted that there's no return?
Liza?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'll let you answer, but we always talked about her being the smartest person in the room, that she manipulates everybody, and she's just a really unapologetic, relentless, ruthless character. And, that just feels exciting to, there aren't enough female characters like that, I suppose. So we really consciously did that, didn't we, Dave?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me, so Livia and I, Claudius, has got a famous sort of matriarch, powerful, poisonous. But when you read the real history, you get more of a sense of why she was like that. The real, Livia was quite a force, but there's reasons for that, because she was on the wrong side of 2 wars that her family's lost. Similarly with Mary, the big thing that I wanted to get across is that she's not just doing it for the sake of it. So from the very beginning, I wanted to see that it's forged in the reality and the struggle of surviving in this period as a woman without means, as a woman without true nobility. Like, she has to do this, otherwise she is fucked. She's very good at it, but it's something she has to do. With George, I think we knew that we wanted him to start, and we knew where we wanted to end. So we wanted to start as a Calais youth and end as a sort of destroyer of kings on some level, and destroyer of peace, because that's the sort of true arc of the real George. But I have to say, finding George the character was probably one of the hardest bits of character detail in the whole show, and really was a sort of 1,000 conversations, with the script team, with Oliver, the other directors, and with Nick, who really wrestled with it. Because there is a sort of transition from someone he's used by everyone and pushed around by everyone, and then he sort of gradually finds himself and then says, no more, now I tell you what to do, you don't tell me what to do. And that transition isn't that clear. It needs to be sort of feel organic and emergent and not just a clean transition. So that was, that is, again, it's 1,000 decisions. You have to go, right, how do we track that through the edit, through the performance, through the writing, through how it's shot? And there was a lot of back and forth with Nick when there were moments where he's like, this doesn't quite work to me, or this doesn't land. So it was, it's just constant challenge, I'd say.
And I mean, Tony, for you in working with Nicholas in crafting that relationship, it feels like at the beginning, it's just, King James loves the physical allure of him, but then it becomes a space where he really respects the loyalty that he sees early on and starts to open himself up and be a little bit more vulnerable and trustworthy. I love the scene where he's like quietly laying his head on his chest, and you kind of use physicality in different ways throughout the series as well. And so how did you and Nicholas set about, using those elements of like physical intimacy and vulnerability to reflect the different stages of their relationship?
Yeah, no, I think, as Oliver, everybody here will tell you, chemistry is an important part. And I'd never met Nick, actually. And, thankfully, Ollie saw my tape and thought, all right, we'll have this crazy bastard, So, and me and Nick were texting for the first 2 weeks. We were in the same hotel in Covent Garden, and we were sort of joking with each other. And, I found out quite quickly that he'd a very sort of, a good, quite amusing sense of humor like mine. But then no, it was just discussing it with me and Oliver and Nick had a dinner, and we talk about it and sort of the sexuality, the sensuality, and the sort of the vulnerability. Actually, I think was important, because I think that scene with when he takes out Lord Lennox's heart and he shares with George that moment. It's as vulnerable. I think it's two vulnerable people together, and I think when I shared that with George, it was a very deep sort of affecting moment for him, and it was almost like, can I learn under you? This is someone who's, I'm not a father figure in a sense, but maybe kind of, but also someone who you can trust deeply and who he maybe is in love with. So no, and there was also Nick's such a down to earth young man, and he's very smart, and he's a beautiful young actor, and he's so charismatic and fun on set as well, that it was easy for us to sort of try different things, and sort of Ollie would say, try this, try that, and apart from when I inadvertently headbutted him, but that was I just blame Oliver for that and just say it was his idea. But I know that it wasn't. It was actually a mistake on set. It was a moment of passion that went horribly wrong.
I love that.
Oliver saying nothing.
Okay, I mean, we definitely had a few bumps on the shoot, but Nick took the most. I mean, Nick's ankle. He had so many injuries because he did a lot of
the chin.
Dancing, he was fighting, he was horse riding, like he was fencing, like he really got bashed, but never ever complained. But to add to Tony's point, I do think that he definitely brought like a playfulness. And I remember that time when Tony and Nick had not met, but they were texting, and it was like it felt like an episode of The Circle where these two people weren't sure if they were catfishing each other. But they got on really well.
I love that. And you know, Oliver, DC, and Liza, I also wanted to ask you about working with Annie Simons, who's the costume designer, and Helen Scott, who's the production designer on the series, because the level of detail in this show visually is so exquisite. And I know that, you know, with the costumes that Annie and her team did, every single one had to be created from scratch. Julianne herself has over 60 costumes throughout the series, because Jacobean costumes just aren't something that you can go into a store and buy at a vintage thrift shop. And you know, with the production design as well, getting the opportunity to film almost every single scene on location outside of a few studio things. I was just interested in kind of how you all worked collaboratively with them to really bring that level of minute detail and authenticity to the series.
I mean, I think that Annie and Helen are just, you know, two extraordinary craftspeople. I'd worked with Helen before. She'd done the movie I'd made before Mary and George. And Annie's the best friend of Sandy Powell, who had recommended her to us for this show. But they're just two incredible talents who I think were so well positioned to have this kind of canvas, because they have such incredible knowledge. I think that's like what makes them so great, is that their knowledge of period and British history was sort of, like, for me as the director, I'm from South Africa, so like when you have two designers who can tell you like in grave detail like what the difference between something from 1610 and 1612 in terms of the size of a ruff, or the paintings on the wall, or the fabrics on the beds, you know, it's kind of incredible, because it's that crafts work. And I think they're just both incredible visionaries. We definitely put them to the test. I think that was a very stressful experience making this show for both of them, because, you know, I mean, there were times when they were still just stitching the back of a dress that was being rushed onto set. Julie had all those costumes that were made for her, and I think it was just a case of having fun. There was this opportunity to interpret the Jacobean period and the court of James I through the lensing of color and texture and modern inspirations and sheer fabrics and all sorts of things, and they just rose to the occasion. I think that like what you see in this show is such a testament to the fact that they're both these two incredible creative people.
But what was so great, what Oliver did in his office, is he took all of these absolutely amazing reference pictures from portraiture at the time of animals being savaged, along with contemporary fashion images. And you wallpapered your entire office, like really quite a big office, all across the doors, everywhere. So anytime anyone went into that space, they could see his vision for the show, which was really brilliant. And I think gave it that you always talked about having a kind of punk attitude to the period, which I think you can see in the way that Annie as well, you know, took references from Vivienne Westwood and McQueen and various different things in some of the corsetry, some of Julianne's fabrics that are in her costume.
Absolutely. And I remember Vivienne Westwood actually died while we were making the show, and Annie, because she was such a massive Westwood fan, in fact, took inspiration from that and later costumes of the men of the beds, men of the bedchamber, sort of like harem of men that James had. I remember watching these guys came into set one day, and I just instantly knew that Annie had made that overnight somewhere, because she was just reacting to the loss of Vivienne Westwood, and I could just see that sort of punk energy immediately in the clothing. It's kind of incredible.
I absolutely love that. Well, I want to say a special thank you to Film at LACMA and Stars for this special screening and conversation. And if you would love to see more of Mary and George, or recommend the series to friends and family, which we always love, all of the episodes are now available to stream on the Stars app. And thank you so much to all of you for sharing these wonderful details about the making of the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.